Welcome everyone, I'm Ben Peacock, and in today's presentation, I'll be sharing with you some insight into how nanoflow cytometry can help you to achieve your research goals and corroborate and strengthen your data outputs from other prominent EV analytical techniques. For further examples of how nanoflow is already being implemented in published work, check out Alice Law's presentation at the NanoFCM booth here at ISEV, or visit our YouTube page for some of the webinars that we've been producing throughout the year. So we're going to start by examining how current techniques meet our research needs in characterizing our EVs, and how nanoflow is going to come in and improve the way we develop our EV research. So in blue, we can see the core techniques for particle identification. Some of these, like DLS, are broadly used outside of EV research and can be widely implemented to determine particle sizes within a suspension based on the Brownian motion of all suspended particles. Others, like TEM or cryo-TEM, can give much more accurate measurement of these sizes, but often require a great deal of time in order to visualize our fixed particles and EVs. RPS has come through as a very sensitive and somewhat quicker approach for measuring particle size and concentration as particles are passed through a pore. Another very relevant and important technique would be NTA, which uses Brownian motion again to measure particles in suspension, although this has often been criticized for its accuracy and importance to EV in future research. And of course, data from all these particle measurement techniques often require phenotypic identifiers for the presence of EV markers. Even though this connection is often indirect, this is very highly important for published work. Immunoblotting stands out as something that we've probably all had to go through, where we identify some of the key tetraspanions, CD9, CD63, or other EV markers, to show that the EV proteins are present in our isolations, where this data doesn't highlight where these proteins are often being found. General flow cytometry is a very good indicator to show the presence of these markers as fluorescent antibodies are bound to our target proteins or EV markers. But the majority of EV flow cytometry work suffers from the poor resolution of EV-sized objects, as well as determination of the lower intensity signals that might be generated by the lower quantities of protein that are associated with our tiny EV targets. And so it's by the combination of these approaches that EV research has begun to get such a detailed understanding of the complexity of EVs. And the next driving force behind future research has to be the introduction of next generation methods, which not only synchronize these important measurements, but do so in a timely manner by reducing our dependence on such a variety of instrumentation. And this is really why I feel nanoflow cytometry is becoming increasingly relied upon as an EV research staple, and will be very important for the future of EV research. And part of the reason for this adoption of nanoflow is that it stems from such a widely used analytical method. Conventional flow has been incredibly important for cell biology and has progressed to allow for in-depth interrogation of some of the larger particles of interest that some of you here might be researching yourself. Nanoflow cytometry helps to bridge the gap to allow for the majority of EVs to begin to be fully understood by using refined, dedicated instrumentation that allows us to gain a detailed understanding of internal and external components of our EVs, whilst providing that physical characterization, the size and concentration measurements of EVs and other particles that is so important for the progression of our research. And one of the refinements specific to our instruments is this very fine sample stream of 1.4 microns. This allows the EVs to travel in single file past our laser, allowing for very good detection of these small particles. Additionally, the, uh, the, the dwell time of the particles in front of the laser beam has been extended to allow for an increased amount of detection on the single photon counting modules that make the detection system so sensitive. A standout feature of the analytical practice of NanoFlow is that the fluorescence emitted by your target EVs is measured simultaneously with side scatter measurements. The intensity of this side scattered light detected from every particle above 40 nanometers provides size and concentration data for all particles, irrelevant fluorescence, whilst removing any false positive signals generated by unbound antibody or loose degraded membrane. This last point is the important answer to some of the criticisms of conventional flow cytometers being used to measure the nanoparticles that we're interested in. And the fluorescent signal which you can choose to apply to your EVs can identify many targets. Antibodies can give excellent and specific targeting of external proteins, not just markers of EVs, but proteins of interest such as biomarkers or cell identifiers. There's also the ability to fluoresce luminal proteins, and I'm greatly looking forward to some of the upcoming publications regarding things like EV loading practices. We also see a lot of work being done with generalized stains, which can either bind to lipids or that are activated by enzymes present in EVs, which are applicable to expand your understanding of EVs in a much broader and unbiased manner. So to highlight the unique sensitivity and resolution of the NanoAnalyzer, we see here, firstly, the side scatter measurements, which are taken for all particles irrelevant of any staining, can easily distinguish between silicon nanospheres within the EV size range, even between monodispersed populations of 47 nanometer diameter and 59 nanometer diameter. We see exceptional resolution between these two populations, very similar to how you would see by measuring by TEM. Of course, with handling times that only require a few minutes as opposed to a few hours. The fluorescence detection as well is sensitive enough to detect single fluorophores and can distinguish between different intensities of fluorescence that may be generated by different populations within your particle isolations. Many of you will already have seen some NanoFCM data being published this year. And where we often see the physical characterization provided by NanoFCM can give data very similar to things like cryo-TEM, as shown in the top panel. Data similar to RPS data, shown in the bottom left. Both of these, of course, are regarded as being very accurate. Some would say potentially more accurate than NTA data, which can often skew our size range away from the expected 40 to 120 nanometer range. And so, in the final segments of the presentation, I'd like to start giving you more insight into how the data looks when actually sitting in front of a NanoAnalyzer. In the schematic on the left, we see particles, some stained, some not, in our sample stream, and as each particle passes our laser, it's detected in up to 3 channels, 2 fluorescent and 1 side scatter. And an example of these is shown in the central panel with 2 burst event traces, 1 side scatter and 1 fluorescent. Now, the intensity of the refracted light in the side scatter channel tells us the size of an object, whilst the fluorescent measurements taken simultaneously identify whether the particle possesses our target. So, to the dot plot, all of the particles with side scatter signal, essentially particles above 40 nanometers, are included, and separation along the y-axis allows us to identify those particles which have picked up fluorescence. Additionally, any unbound fluorescence not associated with a true particle is left entirely out of the dot plot. This is called our side scatter based triggering, and this is what allows such robust data representing the true particles of interest, as well as giving a broad understanding of the other non-EV particles, which you might also be isolating in your methods. And so the software associated with our platform can very quickly utilize this raw data to generate concentration measurements and size distribution profiles for all particles, or for specific subpopulations which you have stained for. This can be achieved by simply gating or drawing shapes around the subpopulation of interest on the dot plot, and means that you can start to identify populations of interest by both fluorescence and by side scatter. And because you can use EVs isolated from a variety of sources and implement a number of different workflows, I expect to see NanoFlow to be increasingly utilizing EV research. Biofluids, conditioned media, it's all applicable. And the optimized protocols that are now being used require merely staining with antibody for 30 minutes before diluting and then using immediately in the NanoFlow cytometer. This means that we can start to get data very quickly with acquisition times between around 1 minute, meaning that your data handling per sample is being 2 to 3 minutes. You're working at about 5 minutes per sample. Very quickly, you will start to collect a vast array of data that will help drive your own research. A quick example of how easy it is to gain such valuable data is that in this simple procedure, EVs were incubated with a FITC conjugated antibody targeted for something unknown in this case. And what we can first identify is that we have our total particle concentration showing two populations on the size distribution. We have a small and a large population. When we separate out the fluorescent from non-fluorescent populations, we see that the fluorescently tagged particles, or EVs in this case, are only found in this larger size population, around the 80 to 100 nanometer size range, mostly. Not only this, but when we look into the FITC negative population, we see that we've actually got a pretty even distribution of our small and large size populations. This is a very, very quick experiment, but which yielded a lot of information about the EVs in question. And so if you could benefit from an instrument which can identify phenotypic characteristics of your EVs whilst defining the particle population as a whole, come talk to us at our booth here at ISEV 2021, or contact us in all the usual methods via our website or by our email address. Feel free to find me personally on LinkedIn as well, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.